The puppy trotted up to him, tail wagging. Then Richard kicked it, hard, sending it yelping into the grass. He looked around, smirked, and walked away like nothing happened. That same man fined me $3,500 for my therapy dog. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air inside my condo felt thinner that night, like grief had soaked into the drywall. Daisy curled up at my feet, sensing the storm behind my quiet. I hadn't spoken a word since returning from the meeting, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I didn't trust my voice to survive it. What could I even explain? That I was drowning again? And this time, no one was throwing a rope? The humiliation clung to me like static. Every syllable Richard had spat out reverberated in my skull. Mental illness isn't a free pass. The words weren't just cruel, they were surgical. Precision cut to expose the softest part of me in front of a room full of strangers. And no one stopped him. No one said a word. I sat on the edge of my bed, running my hands through Daisy's fur. She nuzzled me, then rested her head on my knee, her eyes wide and glassy with unspoken understanding. How do you explain to an animal that the very people who enforce the rules don't care about what's right, only about control? How do you explain that you did everything by the book, but the book doesn't apply when it's you? That night, sleep didn't come. Instead, I replayed the moment over and over. The flicker of disdain in Richard's eyes, the way he held his posture like a gavel was tucked between his shoulders. My chest tightened. Panic gripped me like it hadn't in months, and I had to focus on Daisy's slow, steady breathing just to stop from spiraling. She licked my wrist gently, like she always did when she felt it coming. The worst part wasn't the fine. It wasn't the violation notice or the arbitrary rules. It was the way my illness had been weaponized. Like my diagnosis was some kind of scheme. Like the years of therapy, the nights I couldn't breathe, the mornings I barely got out of bed. All of it could be reduced to a free pass. I'd moved to Willow Creek to heal. But what I'd found was something far more insidious than my depression. A system built on the illusion of order, maintained by people who saw compassion as a threat to their authority. And I knew then, I wasn't just fighting for Daisy anymore. I was fighting for the right to exist in the open, without shame. And in that fight, I had no intention of staying silent. Every corner of Willow Creek Estates now felt booby-trapped. Each step outside my front door was taken under siege. A once idyllic neighborhood, trimmed lawns, picket fences, pastel shutters, had become a battleground, and I was its sole accused. Daisy, once the radiant soul that coaxed me out of darkness, had become a silent casualty. Her tail no longer wagged when I grabbed the leash. Instead, she backed away, ears flattened, eyes searching mine, as if asking whether she'd done something wrong. We used to walk the perimeter path at dusk, taking in the dying light and the scent of gardenias. Now I scanned for watchers behind blinds, lenses peeking through curtains, neighbors who'd once greeted me now frozen in rehearsed indifference. Richard had poisoned the air. The violation emails came like clockwork, cold, automated, cruelly precise. Each subject line a hammer. Immediate action required. Final notice. Escalation in progress. The fines now totaled $3,500, accompanied by veiled legal threats. One email ended with, "Continued non-compliance may result in lien proceedings." Richard was turning my recovery into a debt sentence. But beneath the rules and policies, it was never about Daisy. It was about me. They hadn't banned dogs. They'd banned me. My presence, my difference, my refusal to conform to Richard's narrow definition of acceptable. It wasn't paranoia. One board member, too scared to speak publicly, reached out in confidence. Her voice trembled as she whispered through my phone speaker, "He's targeting you, Lauren. He thinks therapy animals are an excuse for lazy people to break rules. He doesn't believe in mental health. He thinks it's all made up." I remember the sharp sting of those words. Not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I already feared. I wasn't just disliked. I was despised. And Richard Bellamy wasn't just a petty enforcer of property lines and garden statutes. He was a tyrant in khakis and golf shirts, drunk on neighborhood power. He harassed elderly veterans over flag placements, fined overgrown dandelions, and once forced a widow to remove wind chimes due to noise pollution. It was a slow, quiet oppression, the kind no one saw until they were in its crosshairs. Then came the moment that cracked the porcelain shell of his reputation. A comment, barely a whisper in the scroll of the community Facebook group. Buried beneath posts about garage sales and yoga classes, a former board member typed 12 words that made my breath stop cold. If only people knew how Richard treats animals when no one's watching. My fingers froze above the keyboard. The weight of that implication settled over me like lead. I messaged her immediately. No emoji, no pleasantries, just a simple, "Please, tell me what you know." 2 weeks later, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a USB drive, nothing else. The plastic felt hot in my palm. The moment I pressed play, the world around me dissolved into a silence so thick it rang in my ears. The footage was crude, time-stamped in red, with the slight fisheye bend of an outdoor camera. It began innocuously, sunlight falling across trimmed lawns, wind nudging the hedges. Then Richard appeared, striding down the sidewalk in his typical uniform of pressed slacks and a golf shirt, HOA badge clipped to his belt like a sheriff's star. The beagle pup, barely the size of a loaf of bread, trotted into the frame, tail wagging so hard it nearly toppled her. Her joy was instant and unfiltered, the kind of happiness only animals can give without condition. She ran to Richard, full of trust, and he kicked her. No flinch, no hesitation. A swift, brutal motion that lifted the dog off her paws and sent her tumbling through the grass like a broken toy. The yelp pierced through the speakers and straight into my chest. My hand flew to my mouth. I tasted bile. Then, the most chilling part, he looked around. A slow, calculated sweep of his head, then a smirk, not a flinch of remorse. He adjusted his shirt collar and kept walking, like nothing had happened. I replayed it 3 times before I could move. This was the man who stood before an entire community and told me mental illness wasn't a free pass. Who made my life a legal nightmare for needing a therapy dog. Who fined me, shamed me, humiliated me, because I had dared to survive trauma. And all the while, behind his bureaucratic mask of order, he was kicking puppies in daylight. My fingers shook as I dialed a name I hadn't said aloud in years. Kendra Shu, an independent reporter who'd made a career exposing HOA corruption. We spoke for less than 3 minutes before she said, "Send me the video, now." 48 hours later, the world exploded. The headline hit local news first, then national outlets. HOA president caught on video kicking puppy while banning therapy dog. My inbox flooded. Anonymous tips, outraged messages, former board members ready to talk. By the 3rd day, lawn signs began appearing. Recall Richard. Justice for Bella. Therapy dogs save lives. Richard hurts them. A photo of the injured puppy was taped to the HOA office door, scrawled over in red marker. Monster. Richard didn't speak, but others did. 3 board members resigned by sundown. For the first time since I'd moved into Willow Creek, the power dynamic shifted. Not because I asked for pity, but because people saw the truth. And truth can't be fined or silenced. The community center's air was thick with tension. Not the usual bureaucratic hush of HOA meetings, but a quiet loaded with anticipation, like the held breath before a storm breaks. Every folding chair was occupied, and still people stood pressed along the walls, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the podium. The sign-in table overflowed with ballots. I could see faces I'd never seen before, residents who had stopped attending meetings years ago, now showing up in solidarity. Richard entered through the side door, not with his usual self-assured stride, but with something strained in his gait, as if the weight of exposure had finally sunk into his spine. He looked thinner, his skin sallow, like someone who'd spent nights pacing instead of sleeping. His pressed polo clung to his frame. There was no HOA badge, just silence that seemed to wrap around him like a shroud. T-shirts scattered throughout the crowd bore simple messages. I stand with Daisy. Emotional support is not a crime. One woman had Daisy's photo printed across her chest, beneath the words, "She heals, you harmed." When they handed me the microphone, I didn't rehearse. I didn't need to. The words had been sitting in my chest for months, sharpening with each sleepless night. Each fine, each moment Daisy cowered at the door. I moved here hoping this place would help me heal, I said. But I wasn't welcomed. I was watched, punished, labeled a problem because I brought a dog who kept me alive. Richard Bellamy enforced rules like they were gospel, until it came to himself. Behind his obsession with control was cruelty, not just to me, to animals, to the vulnerable. And we all let it slide, until someone hit record. A few gasps stirred. Some lowered their heads. Others nodded, tight-lipped, as if finally granted permission to acknowledge what they'd always suspected, but never dared to confront. When the vote was tallied, the result wasn't even close. Richard stood still for a moment, unmoving, before quietly stepping down from the dais. No applause followed, just the soft shuffling of ballots and the subtle release of a breath the community didn't realize it had been holding. Marcy Jacobs took the microphone with trembling hands but a firm voice. "We are not who we were under him," she said. "This community deserves better. Starting now." The next day, she called. Her voice was gentle. "Lauren, Daisy is welcome. Everywhere." That afternoon, I clipped the leash to Daisy's collar, and we walked. Not hiding, not apologizing, just walking. Past trimmed hedges and waving neighbors, through the park where everything had begun. Daisy trotted ahead, tail high, her bark bouncing in the open air like music. For the first time in months, I felt sunlight without shadow.